Hi, I'm Claire and this is a new book haul. These are all the books that I received from publishers and bought for myself in the last couple of months since I did my last book haul. I'm not going to lift up the whole pile of books to show you right now because I already did that for the thumbnail and it's quite a large pile of books. One time was enough. First up, I have a few comics to talk about. I went to the comic book store recently to pick up this. This is Black Bolt Volume 1 Hard Time, and this is written by Saladin Ahmed with art by Christian Ward, and I picked this up because it's a finalist in the Hugo Awards for Best Graphic Story this year, so I knew I wanted to read it. Honestly, I could probably just have waited and seen if it was in the Hugo Voter packet before buying a copy, but I love Saladin Ahmed's writing and I love Christian Ward's art, so I thought I would probably want to have a physical copy. This one is about Black Bolt, the king of the Inhumans, who has been captured and thrown into a maximum security anti-superhero jail and stripped of all of his powers, and he and a band of ragtag superheroes, supervillain, I suppose, criminals from the prison have to try and escape. This is a very, very colourful book, as you might expect if you've read Odyssey, which was also illustrated by Ward and had this kind of like really colourful, vibrant tone to it as well in the art, but actually the rest of everything, the writing and all of that, that's not particularly light and the contrast works really well. Naturally, since this was a trip to the comic book store, I went in for one book and I came out with three because that is just how things work. So I picked up a copy of Paper Girls Volume 4 for myself. This was written by Brian K. Vaughan, illustrated by Cliff Chiang, with colours by Matt Wilson and the letters by Jared K. Fletcher. Now this is another book that's incredibly colourful and vibrant. It's got this kind of pastel-y theme. Actually, I'm not going to show you pages and I'm not going to look into it myself because I'm only up to volume 3. I just couldn't resist buying more. This is super weird, but the art is incredibly beautiful. Like I said, the colours are really great, and as much as I was confused by volume 1, I actually really enjoyed volume 2. Still a bit confusing, but I could follow the story, so I'm looking forward to reading 3 and 4 shortly. And finally, this is Lady Mechanica Volume 1. This was completely a cover buy. This was created, written and drawn by Joe Benitez, with colours by Peter Stigeveld and letters by Josh Reed. And I have no idea what it's about. I just saw this cover with this steampunky looking lady on it and I really enjoyed that cover. And then the bookseller who was working at the comic book store at the time told me that she'd really enjoyed it and I thought I would give it a try. So we will have to see. I will report further on this one. Next up, I have a few books that were sent to me by publishers, so let's dig into those. Let's start with the books that Orbit sent to me for review. First up, we've got Blackfish City by Sam J. Miller, which comes with a pull quote at the bottom from Anne Leckie, which seriously piqued my interest when I saw this come in the mail. And then I read the blurb on the sell sheet and I was very excited indeed. The book takes place after the climate wars and it is set in a floating city above the Arctic, which happens to be decaying and crumbling upon itself and rife with tension escalating between the very rich and the very poor and the first tendrils of revolt. And then, as if all of that weren't cool enough on its own, a woman riding an orca and dragging a polar bear on a lead rocks up into town. They call her the Orcamancer, and then of course she starts plotting and scheming and trying to bring together those 4 people from completely different walks of life so they can bring down the city together or save the world. I'm not quite sure, but honestly it doesn't matter. It's a cool enough description. I am definitely going to read this one. I'm really excited for it. Next up, we've got Everything About You by Heather Child. Look at this thriller-tastic cover. It says, "It knows what you like what you want, it knows whose voice you want to hear. It, in this case, is a virtual assistant. The virtual assistant to our protagonist, Freya. It knows what she wants to hear, and what she wants to hear is clearly the voice of her recently deceased sister. So the whole premise here is a little Black Mirror-esque, where this virtual assistant has pieced together the personality of Freya's dead sister out of all of her online presences, and using that data, the virtual assistant is in some way able to emulate Freya's sister, except that it's all seeming way too real to Freya. She's starting to wonder whether it could possibly really be her sister. So like I said, a really intriguing, really like thriller-like premise. It could be really, really great, but it also could be extremely disturbing. So I'm going to go into this one like intrigued and wanting to know more, but with caution, because I'm not much for thrillers usually, for this exact kind of a reason. I'm so articulate. Next up, we've got 84K by Claire North, which comes out on the 24th of May from Orbit. And this one is set in a society where basically any and all crime can be paid for. As in, if anyone commits any kind of a crime, they can go free as long as they can pay the fee back to society. And our main character, Theo, works in the criminal audit office for government, which means his literal job is to assess the value of certain things, and in particular the value of the life of a person. Like, if you kill someone, how much will you be charged for the murder? The action here kicks off when Theo's ex-lover is murdered, and in that case suddenly Theo feels like it's very different and like he has to investigate this crime and seek justice for someone who he knew and loved and who was murdered. Now, my immediate reaction to this is I don't know how I feel about reading a book where the protagonist is okay with this system of like government rule until someone he knows is murdered. I mean, I think it's completely doable for a writer to make me believe in that, but not every writer. Now, I've heard really, really great things about Claire North and her previous books, so, you know, I'm completely willing to give it a shot, but I'm going in ready to give Theo some severe side-eye, because if you start off complicit in this kind of work, then there has to be something more than suddenly it's inconveniencing me. This being said, the whole premise for the story is really interesting, and I would like to see what North does with the world building of all of this, with the world surrounding Theo. And of course, I have to mention, this is another one that really definitely sounds like it could be an episode of Black Mirror. Next up, I've got Chateau Moon by Dominique Dully, and this one is out now from Joe Fletcher Books. This one is all about Ori, whose dad is one of the best con men in the quadrant. She's grown up running heists and scams with her dad and with her brother, and she was quite happy to continue in this vein until something went wrong on one of her jobs. She went off script big time, and as a result of the events of that first job, she got accused of a murder she didn't commit, and she had to go on the run. I believe the thing that kicks off the plot is that she steals something, or she stumbles onto some kind of an artifact that turns out to be from like an ancient civilization of aliens that have long ago disappeared from this bit of space. Then the cell sheet mentions an absolutely ruthless pirate and an old space captain who takes Ori under his wing, and then there's a plan that they put together to clear her name. I'm not quite sure, but the cell sheet is packed with stuff, so it seems like this one is a proper space opera romp that moves at a pace, because if this is like what happens in the beginning of the book to set up the action, then that's quite a lot already. So we'll have to see about this one. It certainly seems to me like something that would read very quickly because it seems so action-packed. And finally, for books I received from publishers, I've got this copy of Head On by John Scalzi, which is currently out from Tor Books, and I'm so excited to have this one here because I loved the first book in the series / companion novel to this, which is called Lock In. Lock In introduced us to a near future world that had been dramatically altered by Hayden syndrome, a virus that swept through a small but still quite significant percentage of the world's population and caused them to be locked into their own body, still completely conscious and present but unable to move. And the way that the world has dealt with this situation was with technology. People affected with Hayden syndrome can use robot bodies to move around. These are called threeps, and they allow people to go around their business in a fairly similar fashion to what they were doing before Hayden syndrome, except with like badass robot bodies that can withstand pretty much anything. And that has led to the development of a sport called Mechaka, which you can only play in threeps because in order to score a goal you have to take off your opponent's head and use that to score a goal. So obviously that can only happen with a threep, which is a replaceable piece of equipment like a wheelchair or a pair of glasses. If it breaks, you can get a new one, but it doesn't hurt the actual person who is controlling the threep. And as you might have guessed, the action in this book kicks off when someone playing Mechaka dies for real. They shouldn't have, but they did. And so our protagonists from the previous book, Chris and Leslie, who are special investigators in charge of crimes relating to Hayden's patients, are sent to investigate this mysterious death. I have read a lot of John Scalzi and I have absolutely loved most of it. The things I didn't absolutely love, I liked just fine. So I'm pretty excited to check this one out and see if I like it as much as I did the first one, because I thought the first one was really cool. Something about this series that I didn't know when I first read it is that Scalzi has specifically written the protagonist Chris Shane so that you wouldn't be able to tell any kind of indication of gender in the text. I listened to the first book on audio as narrated by Amber Benson, and I never really kind of thought about Chris's gender. I suppose I probably would have said Chris was a man because that's the way the world has trained our brains to work. It's going to be interesting to go into it kind of knowing that that was Scalzi's intention this time around. We'll see. And now let me tell you about the massive pile of books that I also bought for myself. First up, we've got Robots vs. Fairies, an anthology that was edited by Nava Wolf and Dominic Parisian, and as you can probably tell by the title, it's about robots and fairies, and I don't really know how the kind of versus portion of it works because I haven't started reading it yet. The podcast Fangirl Happy Hour is doing a read along of this and I do want to read along, but I haven't had time to catch up with any of the stories yet. This has stories from Madeline Ashby, Delilah Dawson, Sarah Gailey, Max Gladstone, Maria Devana Headley, Jim Hines, Mary Robin Akowal, Ken Liu, Shauna Maguire, Tim Pratt, John Scalzi, Lavi Tidar, Catherine Valenti, and Alyssa Wong, and more. So this is super exciting. I can't wait. Next up, I've got a couple of books about fandom, and I'm really excited about those. First up, we have Ship It by Britta London. As you can probably tell by the title of the book, it is about shipping, and I am so here for that. We follow Claire, a 16-year-old who is absolutely obsessed with the TV show Demon Heart. She goes to Comic-Con to see the Demon Heart panel. During the Q&A session, she asks one of the main actors on the show a question about his character and another male character and their relationship on the show and the romantic tension there, and he completely laughs off the possibility that this character could ever be gay. It's just never come into his mind, and he just laughs. Claire is obviously crushed to hear this. The fandom and the internet are obviously incredibly angry about this, and the producers have to fix it. And their plan for fixing it is to invite Claire to come with them on the show's summer convention tour to just hang out with the crew and the actors and see that they're all in fact nice people. So of course this is a book about shipping, but it's also about conventions and fans and queer baiting and how the sausage gets made. This is really interesting because Britta Lundin is a writer on the TV show Riverdale, but Britta is a fangirl and she was in fandom before being a writer on Riverdale. So I just think her point of view on all of this is going to make for a really, really interesting story. I can't wait to start this. I realize I've said that like 5 times in this video, but half of the books in this book haul were on my most anticipated for 2018 list, and so it's an embarrassment of riches. Next up, we've got Chaotic Good by Whitney Gardner, and this one is a book about cosplay, which I'm super, super, super excited about. We follow Cameron, a cosplayer in her final year of high school. She is working on a big costume and she needs to go to the comic book store to pick up some reference materials for it, except her family has recently moved, so she has a new comic book store to go to, and when she goes the first time she realizes it is staffed entirely by dude bros who don't realize that ladies read comics too. And so, because she doesn't want to deal with any of this toxic crap, Cameron decides to go back to the comic book store dressed as a guy, and lo and behold, when she goes there cross-dressed, the reception is much better and she gets herself invited to the weekly D&D night. Except then she keeps going back, and then shenanigans, presumably. I don't really know what happens after that, but that's a pretty cool premise. I'm very happy to report that I don't have a problem like that at all at my comic book store, but I've definitely encountered places like that before, so it's going to be an opposite problem to the other book where I was like, I don't know how I can get along with this narrator. Like, there's going to be maximum empathy over here from me because I've been there. Next up, we've got Dread Nation by Justina Ireland, which I'm currently reading and loving right now. This is a zombie book, and we know I love zombie books. This is set in the aftermath of the Civil War. Our protagonist, Jane, was born 2 days before the dead rose on the battlefield at Gettysburg, and all of a sudden there were zombies everywhere, and the course of history was changed forever. And now Jane is in her final year at Miss Preston's Academy, which trains young black women in manners and combat so that they can become bodyguard / lady-in-waiting and work for rich white ladies and protect them from the zombies. Also, in case you hadn't seen this before, this hardback comes with deckled edges, which is kind of really cool to keep seeing and experiencing as you're reading the book. It does really feel more old-fashioned than a regular book. I don't have too much to say about the next one, and that is Raven's Stratagem, Book 2 in the Machineries of Empires by Yoon Ha Lee. This is the sequel to Nine Fox Gambit. I haven't read Nine Fox Gambit yet, even though I know the general premise of it is that our protagonist is the captain of a ship and she kind of gets dragged into this weird mission sharing her body with the ghost of a really smart but also bloodthirsty admiral of legend. It continues in this book. I don't know much else about that, and I don't really want to know anything too spoilery. This is nominated for a Hugo. I am looking forward to catching up on Nine Fox Gambit and then reading this. Next up, we've got Autonomous by Annalee Newitz, which is one I picked up because I'd heard so much about it, and it was on the sci-fi table at my local bookstore, and I have no self-control. Our protagonist is named Jack, and she is an anti-patent activist and scientist who has become a drug pirate. In this world, basically everything is patented, and if you can't afford to buy the patented drug, then you can't get treatment or healthcare, and Jack fabricates cheap medicine for people who can't afford the patented drug, except the latest drug that she has made has left behind it a trail of lethal overdoses, and she is out to try and figure out what is going on and who is responsible for this, because she doesn't believe that she is responsible for it. And finally, let's close with something a little bit different. This is October, the story of the Russian Revolution by China Mieville. This is obviously non-fiction and not speculative fiction, and it goes through the year 1917 and kind of recounts in detail the background behind the Russian revolutions of February and October 1917. This is a period of history that I'm really interested in. China Mieville is obviously known as a science fiction and fantasy, or probably I should say weird fiction writer, but he also has a PhD in political science, and he's really interested in this kind of period as well as social movement. So I've definitely heard him speak on politics before on podcasts, and I always thought he was really interesting and insightful, and that, you know, after hearing him speak, I was left like thinking about a lot of things, which is why when I heard Alex mentioning this book on Galactic Suburbia yesterday and recommending it, I literally like changed the course of my walk when I was running errands and dropped by the bookstore to check if they had this. I was really glad to see that they had a copy. I don't read a whole lot of non-fiction. I think I would like to read more non-fiction, so I'm looking forward to this one. So that's it, those were all of my books. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below if you're interested in checking out any of those books, or if you've read any of them, if you have thoughts about them. And in the meantime, I should go, because as you can see, Tabby has deserted the scene of the crime, and she is now right by the door waiting to be let out so she can start meowing for her dinner, which is in about 45 minutes. So who am I to deny my feline overlord? If you'd like to see more from me, you can check out a previous video on screen right now. And if you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button that's on my face for a new video from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.